I made a non-stick chef's knife. This is my third attempt at making a food release chef's knife, and I'll be combining what I learned from the first two blades into one. Chops, tubes. Hey guys, Matt here. Hollow grinds have been around for a long time. The Yakut knife has a forged hollow, and Japanese chisels have a hollow back, both of which make sharpening easier and cutting friction lower. I'm designing a stainless steel chef's knife, and it'll have ground-in hollows. I don't have the tooling to heat treat stainless, so I have the design water jet cut and professionally heat treated to include cryo treatment in liquid nitrogen. It's pretty crazy. It gets down to negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Star Wars type stuff. This is also how I have my production chef's knives made. It has a lot of knives. There's a lot of debate about what's better, forging or stock removal. If all you've got is tools to do stock removal, that's awesome. But if you can forge, go for it. In this case, I wanted to do stock removal since it was stainless, and I'd never forged that before. I use layout lines for the first stage of grinding. I'm going to do an asymmetrical grind, just like the first version of this blade. I felt it performed better at the food release aspect, which is the whole point. It also looked epic, which is arguably just as important. I'm using brand new 40 grit belts, as fully hardened stainless steel absolutely destroys abrasives. The new belts do help, and this first sight is coming out pretty well. The heavy grinding on one side, though, has caused a slight warp, which I think I'll be able to correct. That's cool. The first bevel came out nice and even. It's time to grind the opposite side and see if that helps correct the warp. I'm using a 36-inch radius platen, and it's grinding in a very shallow hollow to the opposite side. This hollow will, in theory, give the blade less friction through the cut, and it will assist with the food release aspect of the knife. Warp is definitely better. It's not gone, but it's better. With that done, I'm going to grind in a few more fullers on the first side, because I think it's just going to look cool and probably help with the food release. Getting this ground in was really tricky. This was a really awkward angle. Since I just have the 2x48 grinder, I'm using the wheels that are already on it, and it was pretty challenging to grind, but we got it done. Now I'm bringing both of the hollows I've ground in up to a 220 grit finish, and they look a lot cleaner, they're a lot more smooth, and I'm pretty happy with them. Now I'm moving on to grinding in the most important fuller, which will be just behind the cutting edge, and that's on the small wheel attachment at the top of my grinder. I started with a 220 grit belt, but it wasn't removing enough material, so I moved to the 120 grit. With the light set up in the right spot, I can just barely see what I'm doing, and very slowly, carefully, and kind of scary, I get it done. This fuller is the most important, as it is what is going to break the surface tension as you're cutting through food. After it's ground and straight, I add a matching fuller along the spine for a total of 3 fullers on this side alone. It's pretty epic rain right now. I also grind a hollow into the tang, which does 2 things. One, it gives me 2 points of contact to have an easier time making the tang flat, and 2, it gives the epoxy a place to go rather than oozing out between 2 flat surfaces, the tang and the handle. In the end, it'll be a stronger connection for this full tang design. Do kind of right there in the middle. Grinding such a strange geometry did not help with keeping this blade straight. So I'm using a torch to heat the spine to blue, and then I can correct the warp in my 3-pin vice jig. And by jig, I mean it's 3 bent pieces of steel. It's super fancy. This was not easy to correct, and I had to do multiple attempts. In the end, I got it. Whew. That was a bear. Oh my gosh, that sucked. The torch got it close, and then I used a 220 grit belt on the flat platen to get it perfect. Or closer to perfect. Also got it pretty thin. Now I am ready to hand sand the blade. The best part of knife making. That's not true, that was a lie. Just use all the sandpaper in the world. I went ahead and sped this part up for you, as it's probably just as exciting to watch as it is to do. I used a dowel wrapped with sandpaper for the fullers, and a sanding block with leather for the flats. I worked my way up, ending at 400 grit, which in the end gave me a nice satin finish. And the lubricant that I'm using, which keeps the sandpaper sharp for longer, is Windex. Okay. Trusty old vise. Crap. Well, I don't think these are the right size. That was Sharpie? I made a mistake when I sent the design in to get WaterJet, in that the pins were just shy of 1/8 of an inch in the design, which is the size of my pin stock. I did, however, have a whole bunch of 1/16 inch drill bits, and I came up with questionable solution. Can you guess what I used for pins? If not, you'll see soon. I want to be careful to keep the tang lined up with the pinholes as I go, so it's not misaligned when it comes time to epoxy everything. So, as I drill, I place a bit as a placeholder to keep things lined up. And pretty soon, I've got all my holes drilled, and I can trace out the shape of the tang onto the wood. The very top of the scales can't be shaped after it's glued on, so I have to shape that before I epoxy everything together. I don't know why, but I felt like using my wood rasps to shape this, and it was kind of fun. It took me back to my early days of blacksmithing, when all I had was hand tools. Something I typically do on every knife is a forced patina. Basically, kickstarting a patina, a carbon steel blade develops through use. This knife is stainless though, and it will not patina, but I'm curious to see if I can etch it at all and what might happen if I do. 10 minutes later. Not much of anything. After 10 minutes, the only thing that's happened is darkening where the spine was heated to blue to correct the warp, which is interesting. So, I go for another 10 minutes. I don't think I love it. After a few more rounds, there's some really strange pattern on the surface, which would look cool except for the weird spots from bluing. So I decided to resand the blade, and as exciting as that would be to watch, I'll instead show you my encounter with some bees in the yard. What the crap was that? Dude, these freaking bees, man.
It was a bee, that son of a...
Freaking going in my hair? What the crap, man? That's gonna be the third bee I will have killed today. I will kill it. It will not have victory. I don't know why there are so many bees coming at me, but there are 3, and they all got smushed. Well, one went a little kamikaze and drowned itself in the ferric chloride after attacking. Okay, back to the knife. One new trick I've been using is mixing the epoxy directly on the scales, as I have significantly less waste this way. Well, now that the epoxy is cured, I can put on my makeshift respirator. I seriously need a new one. The old one's straps broke. If you have any good recommendations for a respirator, drop me a comment. If you haven't figured it out by now, the makeshift pins were extra 1/16 inch drill bits. I ended up having 4 extras even. The handle shape I'm going for will incorporate facets and smooth sections all into one. I like the look of both, and I was curious how they would look combined. So the top part of the handle, or the first part, will be the smooth part, and the bottom will have the facets. I'm using the bottom wheel to grind in the curved facets, which came out looking pretty sweet. After the handle is rough ground, I use sandpaper going all the way up to 1200 grit to get it nice and smooth. I'm also sure to sand all the bits of exposed steel on the tang so that the scratch lines are all going vertically or in line with the blade. It's time to get an edge on this blade. Wouldn't be very useful if it wasn't sharp. I start out with a fairly rough stone to establish my edge and create the burr, then polish it down with a 1000 grit stone before stropping to break the burr off. With everything finished, it's time to oil the handle, reveal the grain that it works so hard to get to pop with all the hand sanding, and finally test the blade. Chops, tubes. I think this knife looks so cool. But as cool as it looks, doesn't really matter much if it doesn't do what I made it to do. Let's see how it works. So far, it's working perfectly. I will say I probably should have used a russet potato, so I think they're a little bit stickier than sweet potatoes, and it may have been a better test. Next time, I'll do that. I also wanted to see how it worked against the previous blade and if the food release is any better. This is a much shallower hollow, and it's sticking a bit more. It's not quite as clean and easy.
Overall, I think this thing came out freaking sweet. The handle is super comfy. I like the way I shaped it. Not typically a huge fan of full tang. I'm a bigger fan of hidden tang. I just think it looks a little bit classier. But in order, this being the second non-stick and this the third, I think they definitely are getting better as I go. And the asymmetry, I think, just looks really neat. So overall, I'm really happy. It works better than the second one. I think it works better than the first one even. And it's lighter than the first one, which I like. It balances just in front of the handle, which is really cool. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.